I need you to understand something before this story starts. I am going to tell you about a train. Not a haunted train in the way you're picturing. Not a train that runs through fog with ghosts in the windows. A rail train. An Amtrak overnight sleeper running from Chicago to New Orleans. A route that has existed for decades, staffed by real conductors and real employees and carrying real passengers through the real American South. I was on that train for 22 hours. I was supposed to be on it for 17. The 5 extra hours are the story. I am a transport logistics analyst. I work with rail systems for a living. I understand how trains work, how they are routed, how delays accumulate and propagate across a network. I understand the mechanical and operational reality of overnight rail travel in the United States better than almost anyone you will ever sit next to on a train. Nothing I know about trains explains what happened to me in the early hours of a January morning somewhere in Mississippi, when the train I was on stopped at a station that doesn't appear on any route map I have ever been able to find. A station with a name I recognized. A name that should not have existed. A name from something that happened to my family 30 years ago that I have never told anyone outside of that family, that was never in any newspaper, that existed only in our private grief. Are you with me? Then let's go. The train is called the City of New Orleans. That's its actual Amtrak designation, has been since 1947 when the Illinois Central first named it. Famous enough that Arlo Guthrie wrote a song about it in 1971 that most Americans can hum a few bars of whether they've ridden the train or not. It runs daily, departing Chicago's Union Station in the early afternoon and arriving in New Orleans approximately 19 hours later, stopping at something like 14 stations along the way through Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, and Louisiana. My name is James Calloway. I'm 44 years old. I live in Chicago and I have ridden the city of New Orleans more times than I can count, both professionally and personally. My mother's family is from the Gulf Coast. I have spent chunks of every decade of my life on that train, and I find overnight train travel has a particular quality of productive solitude that suits how my mind works. I often do some of my best thinking on overnight trains, lulled by the rhythm of the tracks into a state that's not quite sleep and not quite waking, where problems I've been working on all week suddenly clarify. The trip I'm going to tell you about was in January 4 years ago. I was traveling down to see family, my mother's younger sister in Biloxi, who had been dealing with some health issues that made a visit overdue. I'd booked a roomette, which is the private sleeping compartment Amtrak offers on its overnight routes. A small room with 2 seats that fold into a narrow bed, a window, a small fold-down table, and a door that closes. Not luxurious, but private, and private was what I needed for a trip like this. The train departed Chicago on schedule at 2 in the afternoon. I settled into my roomette, had dinner in the dining car around 5:30, got into conversation with a retired teacher from Memphis and a young couple going to New Orleans for a conference that I've completely forgotten the nature of, and was back in my compartment by 8, reading, the rhythm of the tracks doing exactly what it always did, loosening something in my thinking, making the things I'd been turning over all week feel more manageable. By 10 I had put out the reading light and converted the seat to the sleeping position and was in what I described as my not quite sleep, not quite waking state, which on a train always feels like the train is thinking for you, carrying your consciousness along while your body rests. I don't know exactly when I actually fell asleep, because that's the nature of that particular state. Somewhere between 10 and 11, probably. I woke up at 2:47 in the morning by the time display on my phone, which was sitting on the fold-down table beside me. The train had stopped. The train stopping in the night is not unusual. The city of New Orleans makes scheduled stops throughout the overnight hours. Memphis is around midnight. Various Mississippi stations in the early morning hours. I had been on this train enough times that a stop in the middle of the night didn't register as alarming, just notable, and my half-awake mind ran through the schedule trying to place which station we might be at. The schedule didn't account for what I saw when I looked out the window. I want to describe what I saw very carefully, because precision is what keeps this story credible, and I am aware that everything I'm about to describe can sound, in the wrong telling, like a dream. It was not a dream. I am certain of this in a way I will explain fully before we are done. The station outside my window was small, a single platform outdoor, covered by a narrow roof on metal posts of the kind common in smaller stations built in the early 20th century. The platform was lit by overhead lights, the old yellow kind, that gave everything visible in their range a warm amber quality and left the spaces between them in deeper shadow. The station had a name board, the kind you see at every stop, a rectangular sign with the station name on it, white letters on a dark background, mounted on one of the roof posts at a height designed to be read from a passing train. I read the name on the board. I am not going to tell you the full name of the station. I want to be honest about why, because it goes directly to why this story has been so difficult to tell publicly before now. The name on that station board was the name of my brother. Not my brother's first name. His full name, first and last, exactly as it appears on his death certificate, exactly as it was spoken at his funeral, exactly as it exists in the complete privacy of my family's grief. My brother Marcus died in 1993, when we were both young, in circumstances I am not going to describe in detail out of respect for my parents, who are still living and who have never fully recovered. The circumstances were the kind of circumstances that don't end up in newspapers, that are handled by the family quietly, that exist in the specific sealed space of private loss. The station board outside my window read my dead brother's full name. Not a similar name. Not a name that could be interpreted or misread as his exact name. Both words exactly right. I sat up in my bunk and I pressed my face against the window glass and I read it again. Still there. I want to walk you through my immediate reaction with complete honesty, because I think how I responded in those first few minutes is important to understanding what kind of experience this actually was. My first thought was that I was dreaming. This is a completely rational first response to seeing your dead brother's name on a train station in Mississippi at 2:47 in the morning. I applied the standard tests. I pinched the skin on my forearm hard, the way you do. I looked away from the window and then looked back. I splashed water from the small sink in the roomette onto my face. The station was still there. The name was still there. My second thought was that it was a coincidence. My brother had an uncommon first name, but not an impossible one. It exists, other people have it. His last name is our family name, common enough. The combination of the two in that specific order is less common, but not impossible. I told myself a coincidence of this nature, while striking, was within the range of things that could happen in a world with enough names and enough train stations. I held on to this for maybe 30 seconds. Then I noticed the man on the platform. He was standing at the far end of the platform, at the edge of the yellow light, which put him in partial shadow in the way that anyone standing at the boundary of one of those overhead lights would be. His back was to me, which meant I was looking at his back and the back of his head. He was wearing a green jacket. I want to be precise about the jacket because it is an extremely specific detail that has no rational explanation and that I am fully aware sounds like the kind of detail a person invents in retrospect to make a story more compelling. And so I want to be clear that I noted this detail in the notes I made on my phone the morning after this experience, time-stamped before I had spoken to anyone about what happened, and the jacket was in those notes. My brother owned a green jacket, not a common style, a specific military surplus field jacket, olive drab green, that he had worn constantly in the year before his death, that my mother had given to a cousin after the funeral that I had not thought about in probably a decade before that moment. The man on the platform was wearing that jacket, or a jacket that was identical to it. Same color, same style, same general wear pattern that I could assess from the distance I was at. He was not moving. He was simply standing at the end of the platform, back to the train, facing away from everything into the dark beyond the platform lights. I knocked on the window glass. He did not move. I made a decision in those next few moments that I have turned over many times in the years since, wondering if a different decision would have led to a different understanding or a worse one, or whether the understanding I eventually arrived at was the only one available regardless of what I did. I got dressed. I put on my shoes. I opened the door of my roomette. The corridor of the sleeping car was empty. This is normal for 2:47 in the morning. Every other roomette was occupied by sleeping passengers. Their doors closed, the corridor lit by the low overnight lighting that Amtrak uses to preserve sleeping passengers' comfort. I walked to the end of the car where the heavy door to the vestibule was the space between cars where you could access the exterior door. The exterior door was open. I want to be clear about this. On an Amtrak overnight train during a scheduled stop, exterior doors are opened by the conductor, who then assists passengers boarding or departing. The fact that the vestibule exterior door was open was not, by itself, impossible. We were at a stop, even if I didn't recognize the station, and doors get opened at stops. But there was no conductor in the vestibule. No Amtrak employee, no announcement, nothing of the usual apparatus of a stop. I stepped out onto the platform. The air was cold. January in Mississippi is not as cold as January in Chicago, but it was cold, 35 or 40 degrees. With a damp that came from proximity to water I could hear somewhere beyond the platform lights. A river or wetlands, that particular sound of moving water in the dark. The platform was empty except for the man at the far end. I walked toward him. The platform was not long, 30 yards at most, the distance from where I'd stepped off the train to where he was standing. I covered it in maybe 15 seconds, walking at a pace that was not quite running. I was managing some combination of compulsion and apprehension, the need to see balanced against the awareness that what I was about to see might be something I was not prepared for. He turned around when I was about 10 feet away. I want to describe this as precisely as I can. He was not my brother. He looked like my brother would have looked at the age he would have been had he lived. My brother was 22 when he died, which would have made him 53 now, and this man was roughly the right age, roughly the right build, with features that were not quite Marcus's but were close enough in that yellow platform light, in that state between sleep and waking that my body responded before my mind did. My chest went tight. My eyes went hot. Something in me lurched toward this person the way you lurch toward someone familiar in a crowd before your conscious mind has confirmed who it is. He was not Marcus. He was a stranger. A real, physical, unremarkable man in his 50s in a green jacket on a train platform in Mississippi in the middle of the night. He looked at me. He said, "You got off the train." I said, "Yes." He said, "You shouldn't have done that." I said, "What is this place?" He looked at the name board, then back at me. He said, "You know what this place is. I want to stop here and tell you about a decision I made in the moment that I think was the right decision, although I'm not certain." I did not ask this man if he was my brother or if he had any connection to my brother or what the name on the station board meant. I did not ask any of the direct questions that were crowding into my mind in that moment. I didn't ask because something in the quality of the situation, the way he'd said, "You know what this place is," the specific certainty in his voice, the way he turned around exactly when I was 10 feet away as if he'd been waiting for that exact distance, told me that asking directly was not going to get me to understanding any faster and might foreclose something I didn't want foreclosed. Instead, I asked the only question that seemed to open rather than close. I said, "Is he here?" The man in the green jacket looked at me for a long moment. He said, "He's always been here. Every time this train passes, he's here." I said, "This isn't on any route map." He said, "Some stops aren't." I stood on that platform with the cold, wet Mississippi air on my face and the yellow overhead lights making everything amber and uncertain. And I thought about what it means for a train to make a stop at a station that doesn't appear on any official route documentation, about what category of place that could be, about what it would mean for a specific stretch of track to have a stop that only some people, the right people, or the people who need it at a specific moment can see and get off at. I said, "Can I see him?" The man in the green jacket said, "You already got off the train." I waited for him to continue. He said, "Getting off the train was the seeing." He walked me back to my car. I want to tell you that exactly as it happened. He simply turned and walked the length of the platform, and I fell into step beside him, and neither of us spoke, and we reached the open vestibule door and he stopped. He said, "You need to get back on now." I said, "What happens if I don't?" He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Some people don't get back on. They stay on the platform. The train leaves without them." I said, "And then what?" He said, "Then they're here." I looked back down the platform toward where we'd been standing. The amber lights, the deep shadows between them, the name board visible at the far end. My brother's name, full and exact and impossible, on a sign at a station that wasn't supposed to exist. I said, "He's not suffering, is he?" This was not quite a question. It was the specific thing I needed to know. The thing that my family had carried for 30 years, that my mother still carried, that exists in the sealed space of our private grief. The specific fear that people carry when someone they love dies the way Marcus died. That the manner of it meant something about what came after. The man in the green jacket looked at me. He said, "Does this place look like suffering to you?" I looked at the station, the lights, the clean platform, the name on the board. It did not look like suffering. It looked like a stop on a long route. It looked like a place where a train paused for a few minutes in the middle of the night before continuing south. I got back on the train. The door closed behind me. The vestibule was empty. I walked back down the corridor to my roomette, and I went inside and I sat on the edge of my bunk and I looked out the window. The man in the green jacket was standing on the platform. Not at the far end this time. Right outside my window, close enough that I could see his face clearly in the yellow light. He raised one hand, not waving, just raising it, the palm out, the specific gesture of someone saying, "I see you. I acknowledge you. You can go." The train began to move. I watched the station slide past the window, the amber lights, the name board, my brother's name, full and exact, and then the edge of the platform, and then dark Mississippi countryside, and the lights were gone, and there was only the dark and the sound of the tracks and the motion of the train carrying me south. I picked up my phone and I opened the Notes app and I typed what I had seen, as fast and precisely as I could. Every detail I could remember, time-stamped at 3:19 in the morning. I still have those notes. I have read them hundreds of times. They have never changed. I want to tell you what happened the next morning because it is in some ways the most important part of the story, and because it's the part that took years for me to fully understand. I slept fitfully, partially, but I did sleep for a few hours after getting back to my roomette. When I woke up, the sun was up and the train was in Louisiana. The landscape flat and lush. The light completely different from the dark I'd been in a few hours before. I went to the dining car for breakfast. The train was running late. We were about an hour and 20 minutes behind schedule, which is not unusual for this route. And the conductor, a man named Earl whose name tag I noted specifically, came through the dining car to let passengers know. I asked Earl about the stop in the night. He looked at me. He said, "Which stop?" I said, We stopped somewhere in Mississippi around 2:45, 2:50, between Memphis and the next scheduled stop. I got off and got back on. Earl said, "Sir, if you had gotten off this train between scheduled stops and gotten back on, I would know about it. That's not something that happens without my involvement." I said, "But we did stop. The exterior door was open." He said, "The exterior doors are not opened between scheduled stops. They're controlled from the cab. They can't be opened from inside the car." I did not push it further. Earl was not dismissive or rude. He was simply stating operational reality, the way a professional does when a passenger describes something outside the parameters of how the system works. I went back to my seat and I looked out the window at Louisiana going past, and I thought about what Earl had said. The exterior doors are controlled from the cab. They can't be opened from inside the car. But the door had been open. I had stepped through it. I had stood on a platform in the cold and walked to the end of it and spoken to a man in a green jacket and looked at a station sign with my dead brother's name on it and gotten back on a train through a door that, according to the conductor, could not have been opened. I want to tell you about the research I did in the years following this experience, because the research is part of the story too, and because what I found and didn't find is what eventually brought me to the understanding I want to share with you. I am a transport logistics analyst. I have access to a level of rail system documentation that most people don't. In the months after this trip, I went through every publicly available record I could access about the city of New Orleans route, historical route documentation, station records, maintenance logs, the histories of every station that has ever been served or was ever considered for service on that corridor. I found no documentation of a station bearing my brother's name or any name remotely similar to it anywhere on the route. I found no documentation of any stop, current or historical, between the scheduled Mississippi stops on either side of where I estimated we had been when the train paused. I found, in historical railway archives, reference to an older practice, common in the early and middle decades of American rail travel, before the current era of strict scheduling and GPS tracking, of trains making unscheduled flag stops at locations requested by specific passengers or operators, stops that were not published in standard timetables, that were accommodated at conductor discretion when circumstances warranted. This practice has been officially discontinued. I found, in the oral history collection of a rail heritage organization, several accounts from retired train employees, men and women who had worked the major overnight routes in the mid-20th century, describing in careful, understated terms stops they had witnessed or been part of that they could not account for in their official logs. One retired conductor, interviewed in the 1990s for a railway heritage project, described the city of New Orleans specifically. He said, and this is quoted verbatim from the archived interview transcript, "That route goes through a lot of country that's older than any map we make of it. Sometimes the train knows something we don't. In 30 years, I stopped asking and just let it do what it needed to do." I have read that quote many times. I think the retired conductor understood something that I, with all my professional expertise in how trains work, had to learn on a platform in Mississippi at 3 in the morning. I want to tell you what I believe now, for years later, having lived with this experience and the research and the specific weight of it through every season and through conversations with people I trust and through long nights where I've turned it over from every angle I have access to. I believe that somewhere on that route, in the specific geography of Mississippi in the dead of winter, in the dark hours between 2 and 4 in the morning, in the particular quality of time that exists on overnight trains when most of the passengers are asleep and the train is just moving through the darkness on its own, there is a place that exists outside the normal parameters of where things are allowed to exist. I believe that place knows things. Specifically, it knows who needs what it has. It knows who is carrying something that needs to be set down. It knows who has been moving through their life with a question, Not an intellectual question, not a puzzle to be solved, but a deeper question, the kind that lives in the body, the kind that a mother carries for 30 years about whether her son is suffering somewhere she can't reach. And it creates, for those specific people in those specific moments, the precise conditions necessary for the question to be answered. I believe the man in the green jacket was not my brother. My brother died in 1993, and I do not believe that what a person is continues as a visible, interactable presence on a train platform in Mississippi. I believe the man in the green jacket was something else, something that the place uses to communicate in a language that specific people can receive, which for me on that night was the language of my brother's jacket and my brother's approximate age and my brother's name on a sign. And I believe the answer to the question I asked, is he suffering, was as true as any answer I have ever received to any question in my professional life, and far more important than most of them. He is not suffering. He is at a stop on a long route. He is there every time the train passes. I have ridden the city of New Orleans twice since that January night. Both times I have been awake at the relevant hours, watching out the window, paying attention. Both times the train has passed through the stretch of Mississippi where the platform should be without stopping. I have not been surprised by this. I think the stop happens when it needs to happen, for the person who needs it, when they're ready to receive what it has to give them. I was ready that night, or it decided I was ready. I'm not sure there's a meaningful difference between those two things. What I know is that I got off a train in Mississippi at 2:47 in the morning, walked 30 yards down a platform, was told something I needed to know by a man in a green jacket at the edge of a light, and got back on. And I have carried that differently ever since. The grief is still there. The loss is still there. 30 years of my mother's specific anguish is still there, and I cannot fix it by telling her what I know because I'm not sure she's ready to receive it the way I was. And I'm not sure it would come to her through me rather than directly, on its own terms, the way it came to me. But I know what I know, and for the first time in 30 years, I know it without the fear underneath it. I have told you most of this story. There is one more thing. In the months after this trip, as I was going through the rail archive records I described, I came across something in the oral history collection that I have not been able to put down. There was a second archived interview from a retired City of New Orleans employee, not the conductor I quoted earlier. This one was a woman, a former dining car attendant who had worked the route in the 1970s and 1980s, interviewed for the same heritage project. The interviewer asked her, as they apparently asked all the subjects in this collection, whether she had any unusual experiences or memories from her years on the route. She said yes. She described being in the dining car early one morning. She used the phrase "in the dark hours," which is where we've been for most of this story, when a passenger came in who she had not seen board the train, who was not listed on the manifest she'd been given at departure, who sat alone in the dining car and had coffee and then walked back through the sleeping car and was never seen again for the remainder of the trip. The interviewer asked what was unusual about this, given that passengers could conceivably board at any stop without her awareness. She said the passenger had gotten on between scheduled stops. She said she knew this because she had been looking out the dining car window for most of that stretch of route. Insomnia, she said, she often had trouble sleeping on overnight shifts, and she had seen the platform as the train slowed, had seen the name board in the light, had watched the man board. The interviewer asked what the name board said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said the name of her mother, who had died the previous winter. The interviewer, apparently not quite sure how to respond to this, moved to another question. But the attendant said one more thing before they moved on. She said, "I asked him who he was when he sat down. He said he was just making sure I was okay. I said I was mostly. He said mostly was enough. She said he had coffee. He tipped well. He left. She said she didn't cry until she got off in New Orleans, in full daylight, on solid ground with people around her. She said, "And then I cried for a long time because it was the first time since my mother died that I knew she was okay. Really knew it. In my body, not just in my head. That's everything. I have a train that makes a stop at a station not on any official map, for passengers who need it when they're ready to receive it. I have a name on a platform board that should not exist. I have a man in a green jacket who told me that my brother is not suffering. And I have an archived interview from a woman who rode that same route 40 years before me and was told, by someone who made a specific, unexplained stop just for her, that her mother was okay. I don't know what the city of New Orleans knows that we don't. I don't know how it knows who needs what and when and in what form they can receive it. I know that I got back on the train. I know that I carried what I received all the way south and through the visit with my aunt and back north to Chicago and through every day since. I know that when I watched the city of New Orleans listing on the departures board at Union Station now, I feel something I didn't feel before. Not nostalgia. Not the comfortable familiarity of a route I've ridden many times. Something closer to gratitude. The train runs every day. Some stops aren't on the schedule. You'll know yours when it comes. That's where the story ends. I know this one felt different from some of the others. There's a tenderness underneath the horror here, a grief that the strangeness is organized around, and I made a choice to follow where the story actually went rather than where the genre expected it to go. I hope you felt the dread even through the softness, because both were there on that platform at 2:47 in the morning. If this reached you, if you found yourself holding your breath somewhere in that story, or if it landed somewhere deeper than that, subscribe right now. This channel is built for exactly this. Stories from people who have encountered something that doesn't fit any of the frameworks they had available to them, told as honestly as those people can manage. Please. This one took real emotional effort in addition to the craft, and the like button is the best signal you can give that stories like this one are worth continuing to tell. And leave a comment. Tell me if you've ridden the city of New Orleans. Tell me if you've ever been on a journey, train or otherwise, where something happened that you can't account for. Tell me the name you would need to see on that station board and what question it would be answering for you. You don't have to tell me the full story, just the name. I'll understand. This channel is a record. I'll be listening. See you on the next story.